Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kanopy Cinema Series, and we are just waiting for a few people to stream in before we officially start. Um, Welcome, everybody. And just curious how everybody's day is going, but as we let people stream in, just wanted to welcome everybody to the second installment of the Kanopy Cinema Series this year, where we invite faculty, students, patrons, and others to thoughtfully discuss a topical film. We're thrilled to highlight a poignant and timely film with current events going on, the Plan C documentary with an esteemed panel and moderator who I will introduce shortly. But if you haven't had a chance to watch, you can watch Plan C on Kanopy now at no cost to you, thanks to the generous support of your university and public library. And of course, I'll just quickly go over the synopsis before I start introducing people. Plan C, as many already know, follows as a determined group of women, midwives, and doctors fight to increase access to abortion pills in the United States outside of a clinic setting. In 2014, Francine, a social scientist based in Los Angeles, and her partners launched Plan C to spread the word about access to abortion pills online. This is the story of the work done between 2020 and the shutdown and the overturning of Roe versus Wade in 2022. Before we do get into the discussion, I did want to tell you about some other items coming up in the Kanopy Cinema Series. The first of which is Canary, which is happening in May, all in honor of Earth Day. It's a documentary that follows the life's work of Dr. Lonnie Thompson, who is often called the Indiana Jones of climate science, who went to the far reaches of the never-before-accessed glaciers in tropical regions. He'll be in attendance along with the filmmakers, and I think that you'll find that his story and also the story of the film getting made really talks about the power of how a belief and an idea that you can tell an inspiring story can really take you far. And it's really, just like today, it's really the tale of tenacity. And the second in May is Finding the Money. It's going to be a Kanopy streaming exclusive that premieres in May. And they talk about the other side of the national debate about debt. So I know that that is always a perennial discussion right now in the House. It really kind of flips that conversation. We'll have Francine Kelton, the subject that covers on this Q&A as well. So we've got some great people on this series really discussing some thoughtful, deeply important issues. So, and with that, also one more thing, I'm going to slide through one more time. If you'd like to learn more about the cinema series, you can visit lib.kanopy.com/cinema series, and you can learn more and register for future events. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eve, who is our moderator, where she'll introduce herself as well as the panelists. Thanks, Eve.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Josh. Hi there. My name's Eve Beatty. I'm a contributor to Vanity Fair and the San Francisco Chronicle. And I am happy to be working with Kanopy today to talk to Francine Cueto, who is the co-founder of the organization profiled in this documentary. The organization is also known as Plan C. So Francine is here to talk to us about not just her organization, but how she came to be in this film, and the filmmaker, Tracy Droz Tragos, who has been a documentarian for a number of years now, and this is the first time I'm talking to her today. So thank you both for being here. Can you hear me? Are you audible and visible?
Yes, I think so. I hope so.
Excellent, excellent. Here we are. Thank you all. And as Josh mentioned, you can submit questions all during this conversation using the Q&A function. So please don't hesitate to do so. Josh and Amy will be looking at them. You don't need to worry about distracting me. Josh and Amy will be looking at them and will pass them along to us towards the end of this discussion. So let's get started. My first question is for Tracy. Tracy, this isn't the first time that you have tackled women's reproductive health in your documentary career. What made you decide you wanted to return to this topic, and how did you settle on the idea of the abortion pill. We'll just use that term generically. And then Francine's group, Plan C.
Yeah, well, when Kavanaugh was appointed to the Supreme Court, it looked like the writing was on the wall at that time that Roe would be overturned. And because of the film that I'd made previously, Abortion Stories Women Tell, I knew how bad things. I spent a year gathering stories and sitting with people who had faced unbelievable barriers to access, particularly in the Midwest, in my home state of Missouri. And this was when Roe was the law of the land. So the idea that now things could get even worse and access could be even more restricted felt like it was important for me to revisit it. With all of my experience having made this previous film, it was weighing on me not to look into what folks were doing to prepare for Roe being overturned. And that's when I met Francine, and I reached out to her rather randomly on LinkedIn because I saw that there was this group that was doing work around abortion pill access and sharing information and online provisioning, which I'm sure Francine will talk more about. But I had always sort of understood abortion as something that would be found in a clinic setting. And this notion that there was an opportunity for folks to access abortion care online and to be able to self-manage abortion safely was really a paradigm shift. And that meeting Francine and learning more about the organization's work made me want to lean in and do more.
Well, that certainly makes sense too, because Francine is such a, not to talk about you like you're not here, Francine, but Francine is just made for the camera. So let's give her the camera a little bit right now. Francine, how did you feel when Tracy first reached out to you? Were you stoked to get some spotlight, or were you anxious about the idea that this documentary might bring attention to what is kind of a skunk works operation?
Oh, good question. I responded to Tracy in part because I had looked her up and she had done some amazing work, and she was an amazing documentary filmmaker. And I really honestly didn't know what I was getting into when I said yes, so I didn't really have a lot of feelings, but the whole point of Plan C and what we were trying to do and how we set up our little campaign and organization was to spread the word. So we had already committed to the fact that we wanted to be visible and talked about and needed to be, in every place possible. And so, of course, the opportunity to be in to have help with that by being in a film was why I jumped on the opportunity, and haven't looking back thinking that's one of the best things we ever did.
Oh, God, that's great to hear. Tracy, as when we're watching the film and we follow Francine and other organizers and doctors and practitioners, and it looks like you started following people from almost the first days of the pandemic. Were there specific challenges for you as a filmmaker to produce the doc? I mean, it's just so hard to remember what life was even like then, Tracy. What sort of specific challenges did you have when you were tackling this from the jump?
I mean, all kinds of challenges. I mean, I'm an independent filmmaker primarily. So, and this film was very independent. And in a large way, my work sort of was alongside the work of the organization in a kind of scrappy way, trying to figure things out. But, during a pandemic, of course, there was always the issues of people testing positive, needing to make sure that my crew was safe, that we were testing, that we weren't putting anyone in harm's way by showing up with our camera. But we, did want to tell the story of this, because the work only became more urgent when COVID happened. So it was this double-edged sword of, yes, we need to, this is great, this work, this paradigm of online, provisioning, basically, which means pills can be sent to you in the mail, made so much sense because folks didn't have to go to a clinic then and put themselves in harm's way. to access pills. And so we wanted to cover that, but, you know, it also meant that we had to get on planes and sit with people in rooms to cover that story. So, you know, it was tricky, but we navigated it. And the additional thing I would say was also about anonymity and needing to protect some of this work in ways that, you know, yes, the Francine, the organization, wanted to spread the word about online provisioning and getting these pills by mail. At the same time, a lot of the people in what you might call the supply chain, or, you know, the sort of around that work, needed to be anonymous so that their work could be protected. And that was also just something to navigate delicately, with an open heart, with a lot of honesty and conversations about, you know, how to do this to not jeopardize the work.
Well, and that is, I guess, one of the silver linings of a well-fitted COVID mask. As we see from every single paparazzi photo of Leonardo DiCaprio, the COVID masks are useful not just for preventing the spread of disease, but it does help ensure anonymity. So that, I guess, was a silver lining. Francine, I want to ask you about another sort of like silver lining of the pandemic. And this is something that Tracy touched on just now. What, you know, as we sort of follow the documentary, at first, the pandemic is clearly this incredible opportunity for online provisioning. And it's something that we saw overall in healthcare, that it was like greater opportunities for everyone, from seeing doctors to even like veterinary care. But then we see how, as the pandemic goes on, it's leveraged against women's rights. I mean, it was all obviously also leveraged against people in sort of like various capitalist ways too, but it's being leveraged against women's rights and was used to push things through. Can you talk us through when you felt the tide shift from the pandemic as like an opportunity to the pandemic as sort of a, you know, like a distraction that was used to sort of switch the game on us?
Yes. So the pandemic definitely was, my husband jokes and says the best thing that happened to Plan C was it was COVID. You know, the fact that, as Tracy said, it became clear, well, of course we're going to ship these pills. We're going to not force people to come to clinics. And finally, we were able to get some providers to be willing to do that. But still, not the big organizations, the big clinics were still very hesitant, and became more hesitant because of the laws that began to be come down. Before losing Roe, before Dobbs, we were already seeing huge fear-mongering attempts by legislators in Texas, for example, with SB 8, with the aiding and abetting. Everybody's going to become criminalized for even talking about abortion. We were seeing all of that. So I would put it more, instead of being about COVID, I would say it's about weaponizing or no longer believing in evidence base, right? It's like the anti-vaxxers. It's like we're trying to push the fact that the evidence is that these pills are so safe and effective they should be over the counter. And here we are today, about to have to wait for SCOTUS, our Supreme Court, to rule on whether or not mifepristone, one of the safest drugs and the most studied drug probably in existence because of how many people have used it and how much it's been studied, is going to be decided upon by the Supreme Court. I mean, so it's more that it's shifted to this issue of, we don't believe evidence, we believe more, conspiracy theories. So I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but that's the shift I saw, rather than COVID no longer being helpful.
But do you think that some of this legislation, I guess one of the things that sort of spurred this question for me is exactly what you brought up, the whole, like, the Texas lawsuit thing. I had completely forgotten about that as something that happened in the world, because I feel like so much has happened since then. in the general sort of political space, as well as in like the anti-forced birth and reproductive rights space. And so I guess what I'm wondering is if you have the sense that things are getting sort of moved through just because we don't have time to process everything that's happening.
Well, definitely. And I think that's the beauty of what Tracy did in this film. She caught history in the making. She documented. We can go back and look at the film. We ourselves have kind of forgotten about the gig of going to Texas with our billboard because we're moving on to trying to figure out what the next thing we have to address. You have to stay nimble. You have to be out there. I think the beauty of what Tracy did with this film was document, and it is a slice of history. I mean, there's much more I can tell you, and I hope I have a minute to tell you about all that has happened since the end of this film. These same providers basically being nimble and figuring out how to take on the next thing in law that gets passed in a very, very productive way. So that's one thing. But the other thing is back to the issue of confidentiality and privacy and respect. What Tracy did was you see in the movie, you see and hear from folks who appreciate the fact that they were able to get these pills by mail. There's both sides, and that is so hard to describe. We now have numbers to show that we're talking about tens of thousands of people in the states like Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, who have received the pills from these providers and who are sending emails that are just heartbreaking in the thanks and gratitude they have to the providers who are willing and able to do this. And Tracy caught that in the film.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Tracy, one of the things that we hear again and again in interviews, and it's also implied by just sort of like the framing and the editing, and also we just know it because we're people who live in the world, is that abortion providers face like true and genuine threats. But then in the film, in contrast, there are also like moments that are almost comedy, like Francine sort of sneaking around the school with her stickers, and the roving billboard that Francine just mentioned. The guy driving, that guy's a star. But the billboard, like all of that was like legit funny. So as a director, how do you find that balance between like the real legitimate danger that these women face all the time and this funny stuff? A lot of people in our audience are either instructors or are aspiring filmmakers. So what sort of guidance can you give these folks who are just starting off on how you can tackle a controversial topic and hold both of those things in your hand at the same time?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's super important to bring humor where you can and where it's appropriate. And again, it's not laughing necessarily at someone, putting someone down, but I think Francine, as you said, is wonderful on camera and is in a self-deprecating kind of way, so that we're rooting for her while we're appreciating what she's doing. And I'm glad to hear that you found the humor in that. Because some of this is so intense. With sitting with the people that do this work, there is also so much burnout. And we need that. Audiences need it. People who are doing this work need it. I think, storytelling in general needs it. So yes, I always look for the humor moments in my filmmaking, even when it's pretty intense subject matter, because you need it. But it is a delicate balance of how to calibrate it, when to calibrate it, and making sure that you're doing it in a way that you're checking on the humor cues. Like, how will your audience feel about this? Will they feel like icky because they're making fun of somebody or mocking something, or will they feel good about it? And I hope that's the case with Francine's work. And so I'm glad you noted that scene.
Well, I mean, the hat alone.
And the sunglasses.
Or my husband's comment, which brings down the house every time also. I have to say that I've sat through the movie more times than you would like to think, because I'm so often on a panel afterwards, like right now. And I love just being in the audience and the audience reaction. I really, frankly, have rarely been in movies. I can count them on a hand, real movies in which the audience participation is so present. I mean, people gasp, then people laugh, and then there's like, oh, groans. I mean, it's amazing. I just have learned so much, and I'm so appreciative of the power of film and a good film, basically, in doing this, in grabbing the heart. And if I may, that is why using this film now, this year, as we go out into an election, to have people be able to see this film and not lecture at them as to what they should do or how they should vote or anything, but just have them hear and see and feel what it is that is being made possible by these providers at a time when we're all going to be asked to vote on whether or not we should be able to continue to have access to this.
And I may just add that, you know, in making this film, what was different than the previous film I made, Abortion Stories Women Tell, is that this film very much is a story that I hope people will have a certain amount of optimism in having watched, and feeling about, you know, what's possible. I think Josh used the word earlier, tenacity, but, you know, when folks come together, and you know, seems a little hokey, but be the change they want to see, that this is really a sort of a ground up movement of regular people who are doing this work. And anyway, I am hopeful, as much as people, you know, might have some laughter, also feel some, you know, some of the hard stuff and the intensity that providers are going through and people are going through to access the care that they need. They'll leave the film with a sense of optimism and maybe a sense of like, okay, you know, I can do something. And so that's how this film is different, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, because I do think that, like, for me, I was not with an audience, and like, you know, just sort of halfway through, I paused and I was like, oh man, if I wasn't going to be moderating this panel, I don't know if I can make it. And I'm glad that I pushed through the rest of it, because there's, like, you know, there are moments where you feel so furious and so frustrated. And Francine, there are moments that where you sound angry and frustrated too, but it rarely seems to be because of the Supreme Court. It seems to be because people are suggesting that you need to keep yourself safer.
Absolutely.
Like the only time that you seemed like truly ticked off, you were like almost dismissive sometimes when people like sort of seem to be worried about you. And we don't see you scared or flagging or with like second thoughts in the documentary, but you must actually have those. Like, what's your secret?
Eve, so you're right. The thing that makes me the most angry are when I feel like I'm being silenced, or anybody is being silenced, or when fear is being used to try to silence or stop. And that is what is happening, and that is what has been very effective, in fact. And that's how the laws are being used. That's you know. So the point is, yeah, so when I get angry, then I'm not fearful. I get angry, and then I want to do something. So that is what you're seeing of me. What I want to say is, to Tracy's point about optimism. The whole point of Plan C, when we created it in 2014, my co-director Lisa Wells and I had just gone to Africa and Ethiopia, and we had seen over the counter that you could buy abortion pills for the equivalent of $8 in Ethiopia that would give you a safe abortion. And we came back home and found that that was the first year that Texas had been shut down. All clinics had to wait while we worked our way through the Supreme Court to fight for the fact that we had a right to an abortion. And that's when we decided, okay, this is enough is enough. We need to spread the word. So the whole point, back to the very first question you asked me, the whole point of Plant C and the whole point of my being is spreading the word about a very safe and effective, and that should be in the hands of everyone. So that put together with being strategic about recognizing where the leverages are and the levers are of power and who needs to get on board is what has driven Plan C. But it's amazing right now. This is a movement, as Tracy says. Everybody can participate by watching this movie. And I believe then that after having watched this movie, you're going to take some information to somebody else or to yourself or to a friend about the fact that this option exists, is being a part of the movement, gives you some agency to do something in this very difficult time. And we have heard over and over and over again that this is like the only positive news right now in this ecosystem of access to reproductive health. It's positive news, and people can be a part of it by spreading the news, not being afraid. I will end with one example. There was an article just last week or recently in the New York Times about these providers, the same providers that are in the movie, who since the movie also, again, nimbly swiveled to realizing, hey, let's pass some laws in the states that we live in that are liberal, like California, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, that will shield us as providers, that won't extradite us to Texas if we mail to Texas. And thanks to these shield laws, these providers now are the reason we can say to everyone, every state, every territory of the United States, whoever you are, you can get a safe, abortion. If you contact these providers, they will send you pills. They will help you through it. It's real, and they'll do it at cost. If you can't pay, they'll give it to you for free. And so this is where we now stand, thanks to this whole movement of everybody. And our biggest issue now is for people to know that this option is available to them. Without knowing, they can't exercise it. So that is our goal now. And I hate it when fear comes in and tries to say, you can't talk about this. In that New York Times article, they portrayed not only the providers who showed full face and talked about them doing themselves, but they had a young woman like Tracy did in the film in Texas who had gotten pills mailed to her now in this day and age, and with the kind of fear that exists in Texas, and was willing to have her face, her name, everything in the newspaper. And everybody, lots of people immediately called and said, whoa, are you putting it at risk? Why did you do this? And my feeling was the opposite. Wow, amazing. You're amazing. Your courage. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, that's an example of stepping up and not falling for fear.
Well, you set me up perfectly for my next question too. So I'm glad you provided that example. Because Tracy, what I wanted to ask about, and this actually relates a little bit to the subject of the last panel I got to moderate for Kanopy Subject. So everyone should watch that movie too. But we meet providers, some of whom are completely anonymous and some of whom aren't. We meet people who have benefited from the pills. And, many of these people are very vulnerable. We do see their faces. And even if their faces are obscured, there are other things that are identifying. They are very vulnerable with you. What sort of special steps do you take as a filmmaker to ensure that these subjects feel comfortable? Because not everybody is media trained, Francine. What do you do to get them to be candid and get them to be vulnerable and make them safe?
Yeah. I mean, I think, ultimately it's a lot of conversation. No one is told, there's no like guidebook to being in a documentary and what's involved. And often documentary work is unfolding. Francine said she had no idea what she was getting into when she allowed me to come to her home with a camera. Even if she had some media training, she didn't know the full extent of it. And that's true, with documentaries, often you don't know where they're going. But with this film in particular, there was a shared why. There was an understanding that, I not enough people knew about this option. And this film would tell the story of this option and the people behind this option in a way that, we wanted to get out there. And Francine in particular was having a hard time in her organization as much as it was about sharing information, because of censorship or stigma or, all of the reasons why, was having a hard time getting the information out there. And this was just another lane of telling the story about this option. So, as much as people maybe who received the pills were vulnerable and had stories around barriers to access, they also had this feeling of, I don't want someone else to go through what I went through. I am sharing this for someone unknown out there so that they know that this is safe, and maybe also don't have to jump through the hoops exactly that I jumped through and all of that. And so, the shared why, I think, is a real significant thing to have when talking about, why you're entering a space with a camera, what you're doing with a camera. Because clearly, in my work, I don't want to kind of have it be one-sided where I'm just taking something. And so I feel like, the folks that were giving something also felt like they had something to gain in giving. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to ask this question at the risk of pissing off Francine, but I'm gonna take the leap, because it is going to imply fear. But Francine, I'm actually, even though I'm from the Bay Area, I'm in Indiana right now. I'm in Todd Rokita's Indiana right now, and I kept wondering as I was watching, the movie, oh my God, they're giving away the whole playbook. Are, some of these legislators who are looking for specific tax and ways to get in there. And Todd Rokita, for members of the audience, he's the Attorney General of Indiana, who made sort of headlines in reproductive rights circles for a sort of innovative way. He tried to shut down a doctor who was prepared to perform an abortion on a 10-year-old child who had been raped. And so I felt anxiety for everyone about giving away the playbook and maybe opening the door to other people who are, proponents of forced birth. But you're ready for that trade-off?
Oh my goodness.
Or did you keep parts of your playbook serious and like secret? Please tell me you kept some stuff secret.
No, we don't. And it's been tense even within my team, because there's a continuum of feelings about how smart the strategy of just laying it out there and not hiding anything. But I have to say that I believe that I have been proven right in saying that taking the strategy of not hiding, not doing it. When we first started, I would say we've been around since 2014, almost 10 years. For the first 5 years, our entire community of reproductive justice and advocates really, really were very, very worried about this whole issue of us handing over the playbook. But my feeling was, if you don't lift it up and talk, you miss opportunities. You miss partnerships, you miss opportunities, you can't move ahead. This underground kind of movement of, well, let's just make it woman to woman. We will keep everybody safe by only sharing words. I just felt like that was undemocratic and not helpful, because who then is lucky enough to know Francine Cueto so she can tell them personally about this. That's not how it works. We have to be very, our approach has been put it out there, put it on a website, get it out. And of course, there's been worries about it, but I believe the opportunities that have come have totally outweighed the possible fact that we might have informed someone. I also want to say, come on, you don't think that the right knows the playbook of the left, or that the left doesn't know the playbook of the right? We do. We all do. We're all smart, and we know what the other one's doing. The question is, are we effective about countering where the other one is going? That's my take.
I think that you give some opponents of reproductive rights far more credit than they deserve. I think that many of them couldn't find a uterus on a map. But I appreciate your answer, and I pray that you are right.
Well, I will say that we didn't, in the film itself, the playbook, you know, we disguise the locations where people are, so people don't know where people are, and some identities were protected. And you know, I do think that yeah, I mean, I hope that the film doesn't put anyone in harm's way, and I don't think that the film, you know, knock on wood, will. But there's also this sense of, you can't, if you always censored for what bad actors are going to do, or, you know, it's really picking up on what Francine just said. If you are constantly worried and imagining, what are they going to do? How are they going to get me? How are they get? Yeah, you're not thinking ahead. You're not, you know, and so to be ruled by bad actors is maybe, you know, is maybe not the way to have the most you know, the most success or you know, change in the world. So a lot
And
of
may I add to that, Eve? I want to remind everyone that we're in a place around these pills because the right knew 30 years ago to restrict access to these pills at the FDA level. The restrictions that have been put on these pills at the FDA level, which is what we're about to hear now in the Supreme Court, were because the antis recognize, OMG, if these little safe little pills get out, we've lost our battle. And so the restrictions are political, not evidence-based, back to what I was talking about. They weren't scientific. We knew when I was part of the group that, you know, sent to the FDA the file to ask that these pills be made approved in the US. We knew the evidence. It was incontrovertible. It was safe and effective. And we thought for sure it was going to get approved. Well, they did get approved. They couldn't get around the fact that there was so much data on how safe they were, but they figured out how to put restrictions on access that have basically put us in the position we are today, in which for decades, the rest of the world went ahead with these little pills, including, you know, Europe using, you know, 98% of all abortions were done with pills, and we were still barely at 50%. That was all based on strategy on the other side, recognizing how dangerous for them these little pills were. So I'm back to the issue of it's fighting with evidence and forcing folks to understand the evidence.
I like that. And it would be nice if for a change, evidence won out. Tracy, I want to ask you about a part of the movie that confused me. So I guess this is a little bit of a selfish question, but here we are. There's this part about social media and social media call out. And I should mention to the audience that we were talking right before this, and Tracy mentioned that her New Year's resolution is to be off social media. So that's why this is especially funny. But I'm not exactly sure what happened with the social media thing. Can you explain that part of the film for us?
Yeah, and it's really, you know, it's kind of goes back to what Francine has talked about some in this conversation, that the strategy of being loud is not the strategy of everyone kind of on the same team. And there have been, some folks feel like it needs to be more woman to woman. And, Francine, as you said at the open, or as Josh said at the open, is based in California, is a white woman, has certain privileges in being loud about this issue, whereas some communities and in some places have more risk of criminalization and laws like SB 8 putting them in harm's way. So, this was really within the movement. I think Loretta Ross talks about, the sort of side punching that happens where folks disagree about strategy. And, unfortunately, that was a hard part in the film to navigate, because at the end of the day, my why was, telling the story of this movement, telling the story of this time. But it is also a bit of the cautionary tale in the sideways punching that can happen among folks that are on essentially the same team, but may have different strategies. And, it is something that I know folks have talked a lot about happening, particularly in the reproductive rights and justice circles. And in part, I will just say, because it's work where there's not a lot of money, a lot of people are volunteering, a lot of, and so it's scrappy. And so there's a survival mode for fundraising, a survival mode for, and the national big mainstay organizations that are clinic-based have typically gotten, sort of sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And so the little scrappier ones that are trying to do things in, outside of the box and new models and being more disruptive are often called out.
Yeah.
For the strategy, which may be threatening. So does that help explain?
It does. Well, it does. And I think that, like, it's always an interesting decision, and it must be a challenging decision as a filmmaker to show that when you have a film with a very specific point of view like yours, to show that even within that very specific point of view and vision, that there is this fracture, it's a brave move. And I'm glad you included it, but it's so easily counteracted when you show the incredible diversity of the people, the providers, the volunteers, and everything else. That, yeah, sure, Francine, is evidenced by her beautiful selection of tote bags, is, a woman of, a woman of certain gentility. And so, seeing that there is this group that is working with her that is, that is diverse in so many different ways, though, I think belies a lot of that criticism just so gently. You didn't even have to say anything.
Well, yeah, a lot of, but there is a lot of and I think we see it now in a election year in 2024, and it is, with organizing, it's, it happens historically that that things can break down, especially in moments when everyone is under pressure and burnt out, as I said in the beginning. And maybe a good joke, everybody needs a good joke to kind of lighten the mood, but it got pretty intense there for a while. And I know Francine continues to feel that during this time.
Sure. Not looking at Twitter just helps so much, though. It just, that's just advice regarding everything. I want to get to the Q&A submitted by our viewers, but as I expected to do, and as Francine hoped I would do, Francine, can you give us a whirlwind tour of everything that's happened in the world since the end of the documentary? But wait, I'm gonna ask you about Walgreens and CVS, so don't talk about that stuff because that's one of the submitted questions. But if you can talk about broad strokes, everything else, we already know about the Supreme Court. What else is going on?
The most important thing I can summarize very well by where we are today, which is in an amazing place. today, thanks to about 12 providers based in 6 states that have these laws that will shield these providers, thanks to them, anybody in the country can get pills mailed to them and can have access to a clinician who will help them answer questions about how to take these pills. So this all happened. There are many steps that got us here, including changing laws at the state level to have these shield laws, including finding intrepid providers willing to take quite a bit of risks, including mainstreaming and reassuring people using Reddit and social media that yes, these are safe, effective, real. A big question we constantly see on Reddit is this for real? People can't believe that it could be really true that you can get an abortion for $150 or less that's going to be safe and effective, and you can do it in your own home. It's just a truly, head swirling kind of reality. So that's where we are. It's been the amount of steps that happened since the end of I felt for Tracy, who just finally decided, heck, I have to stop and I have to pull this together and have it come out because, we were losing Roe, but she knew how much was happening, and it requires a sequel because very clearly the one person in the film who is doing the mailing from New York to, very surreptitiously now became a group of 12 people in 6 different states able to do it outwardly, legally, names on their faces in the newspapers. Amazing reaction. So that's where we are today. Still a lot of work, and you're going to get to ask my question. Still a lot of work, because ultimately what we really believe has to happen is they have to be over the counter. They have to be cheaper. And everyone needs to know about them. And it should be like, I have a headache, I need Tylenol. I have I have a late period, I need mifepristone. And that's where we have to get in this country. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we're on our way, despite all the other things that you read in the media about the laws.
Well, and so that leads us to our first submitted question. I don't want to get into speculating about what the Supreme Court may or may not decide when they hear it on March 26th. So let's focus on the news from Friday, which is that Walgreens and CVS have announced that in certain states in this country, they will again be dispensing abortion pills. Does that have an impact on your operations? Does that make things easier? Does that make things harder? How does this help or hinder you?
So I want to correct that. It's not that it will again dispense. They never did. It definitely helps the Plan C mission, which is that we need to get these pills in the hands of the people who need them, and pharmacy access through our system of medicine in this country to destigmatize and legitimize and mainstream this safe pill requires that it literally be over the counter, meaning it's been deemed so safe that you don't need a prescription for a doctor. So clearly having them now in pharmacies is a step closer. It's where it should have been if the political restrictions that were put on 30 years ago would have been done without those restrictions. They would have been like any other prescriptive medicine. Your doctor prescribes it, you go to the doctor and you pick it up, and we don't need to set up all these crazy systems that we've set up. So that's, yes, helpful. It's also helpful in pointing out at this moment in time when the Supreme Court is forced to have to vote on this because they were forced by a strategic law in Texas by a judge who they knew would do this. It is going to show that these restrictions were already ridiculous. We shouldn't have to go. The pharmacies shouldn't have to be specifically trained and have to fill out all these regulations in order to carry mifepristone. That's baloney. That shouldn't happen. It should be like treated like any other drug. So in a way, that's going to be helpful to point out how do we get closer to where we should have been if we had treated this like a normal product, safe product in this country.
One of the things I was wondering though, because and it sort of relates to what you mentioned earlier though, is does this create sort of a stratified society that in some states, you know, you can just go to CVS, your doctor can call it in and you can just go to CVS, and in other states, you have to have it mailed to you?
Well, we know about access to health in this country. It's stratified.
That's
period.
true. I guess that was
Okay?
a sort of deliberately naive question.
No, I know, Eve. I know, Eve, but I just have to say that. And the same thing happened when everybody got so excited about we lost Dobbs, and that was our safe protecting us to abortion access. There are way too many communities in this country, and they are not communities like me, white, and in California, that knew already that they didn't have access to abortion, you know, because it was stratified. So yes, when we were, so interesting issue about playbooks. Now I'm going down a rabbit hole. I will stop myself from my rabbit hole.
Okay.
But we worked hard to get Plan B, emergency contraception, over the counter. And one of the big problems with getting things over the counter, and over the counter means that you no longer have to have a doctor who prescribes it. You can
Right.
just buy it at the pharmacy.
Right, like Tylenol.
Exactly. Well, we know that when when products go from prescription only to over the counter, and that's what has to happen in the way the system works, the FDA has to approve the fact that now it's so safe you don't need your doctor, will now allow it to go over the counter. The price always goes up.
Yep.
And not only does the price go up, but now insurance doesn't cover, because your insurance doesn't cover you when you go get Maalox at the drugstore, but it will cover you when you go get a you know. So a right away issue of cost becomes an issue. So the answer to it, I'm not worried about stratification. We have stratification in this country. I do want it to become more normalized and get to work on the issue of cost. Reducing the cost is going to be a challenge, as it is with any product that goes over
One thing at a time, Francine. Let's just make it so people can get it.
And I want to add about the stratification, because I do feel like, you know, in just sitting with where we are now, it is absurd, though, when you think about it. You know, are we a loose federation of nation states? Are we going to have, you know, border security, you know, between Illinois and Missouri, or, you know, between these banned states and access states? I mean, I do think people need to sit with the stratification of where we are right now, and how, yes, there is, you know, much more access in other states, despite the ongoing intrepid work of Plan C and all of these other organizations and providers who will ship. There's still, you know, they're still, you know, many states are trying to enact laws about people not being able to travel out, or, you know, are they going to pass laws where they look through everybody's mail? I mean, I have no idea, but it's not, you know, I think as a country, we have to sit with this, especially in an election year. Like, is this something we want to stand for? And for the most part, we're seeing a majority of people don't want this, even if they are in, you know, banned states or states that are typically voting more conservative. They're saying, no, you know, we don't want this. So I'm hoping that people will show up at the ballot box and continue to kind of protest what is really an absurdity when, you know, there is such stratification among citizens of what is one nation, you know, one nation.
It's really helpful that you spun the sort of some of these potential dystopian futures, because my next question from our audience is about your past, Tracy. That your degree, I know that sounded so much darker than I intended, but your degree is in fiction writing, and your MFA is in screenwriting. So it seems like you have tools in sort of the fiction area. And our audience is sort of wondering how you take the tools that you learned in college as a sort of fiction creator and apply that to creating dramatic narratives in documentary works.
Well, that's a wonderful question.
Our audience is
So
wonderful.
I mean, yeah, I mean, editing is very writerly, and you know, I'm working on a film right now. You don't see it, but I have 3 monitors here, and after I get off of this, I'm going to go back to a bit of editing. And it's a very writerly exercise. I'm still interested in fiction films. I think there is incredible power there, but I am, you know, very much drawn to documentaries. Because there's a lot of power here in this format, a lot of power in meeting wonderful people like Francine and capturing things that are happening in our world as they're happening. So I'm drawn, but then yeah, it's not live TV, right? So I am then taking all of this footage and assembling it and understanding what goes where and what is a scene and the importance of people amidst it all. You know, I mean, for me, it was very important to even have a glimpse of Francine and who she is as a person outside of her activism, you know, that she's a mother and she's a wife and, you know, she, you know, gets her daughter off for the day, like so many people get their kids off for the day. You know, these are things that, you know, from a character building standpoint and as a writing standpoint, I think about, and that are kind of, you know, mainstays of storytelling, no matter what format you may be telling it in. So I hope that answers the question. But
Yeah, I think that it does. Well, we are almost out of time, but Francine, I want to ask you one last question from, once again, from our audience. And it's clearly a fantasy and fiction question, but let's go for it anyway. Dream scenario, what if tomorrow there was no longer any need for Plan C, no longer any need for you to be fighting this fight? What would you do instead?
Oh, Lord. This, so I have such a hard time even accepting the first part because one of the things as a public health professional is I'm so wedded to the knowledge of the fact that there will always need to be abortions. So, but that aside, it's a very pertinent question because I am retiring. I'm trying very hard to retire. I have handed over my role as a director of Plan C and to actually a wonderful team. And the Plan C will be continuing, and I'm trying very hard to become more of an advisor and to. So everyone's asking that question. I'm asking it. My husband's asking it. My colleagues are asking, "What are you going to do when you retire?" You know, it just is a continued wanting to just to do whatever I can, and this election year is a good example to just sustain what I know are based on my compassion for what people are putting up with. I have a sister right now who's dealing with bipolar illness, and we had to today make a decision to rehospitalize her. And bringing back the whole issue again of access to care, how difficult it is if you're indigent, how difficult it is, how stigmatized it is. So I breathe, and I will continue to breathe and live, trying to help reduce all these crazy obstacles and make it more more so that everyone can access their health care and their human rights in the way that they should. So I'm not going to be able to give up, as you can see. Thanks for the question.
Of course. It sounds like you've answered that one a lot.
No, I've never gotten that question.
Oh, well,
so thank you for it.
Our audience is amazing.
Yes.
Josh, do we have anything else for these two fine folks today?
No, I believe that was the extent to our questions today. So I think we are just about wrapping up. Are there any final remarks or questions that we have
I
here?
I think that we have everything, and I think that Francine and Tracy have given so much of themselves already.
Ah, very, very nice of you to say that. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I'm glad to have been here and with you all.
Thank you so much for participating. Everyone watching, obviously, you know that you can watch Plan C on Kanopy. If you haven't gotten the message from Tracy and from Francine that they are eager for you to share the message of this documentary with everyone you know, then you have not been paying attention. But you know what to do. It is easy to share. And obviously, Josh is very eager that you academians in the audience also share this with your classes, that you use this as a teachable moment. And I'm sure that if you have any questions for the Kanopy team, you know how to reach them. So
Great.
unless there's anything else, Josh, I suggest that we sign off for the day.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much
Thank
to
you,
everyone who
everybody.
came today. Bye-bye.
Bye.